1332 is the number to call. We'd love to hear from you now, because you might want to ask our next guest a question about baking. I don't know how good you are at baking. I'm not bad at cakes. Maybe you've baked your own Christmas cake. I have to be honest, I have not. Maybe you've made your own mince pies. Maybe you've made a special cake. Maybe you've made a wedding cake or a christening cake. If you have, I'd love to hear about it. 1332. If you've ever made a wedding cake or a christening cake for somebody, tell me the story. What did it look like? Describe it to us. Tell us about what went into it and whether or not it worked out well. I'd really be interested to hear. I'll tell you why we're talking about this, because you're about to meet a woman called Jackie Thompson from Contemporary Cakes in Daisy Hill. And she's so good at cake baking, she's just produced a book that might help you with some great starter projects in very decorative cake baking. But also, her cake and foods are so good, it's featured in movies. And there she is, sitting in Daisy Hill with her shop. Jackie, welcome.
Thank you.
So now then, tell me about the book. You do cookery classes, don't you? Baking classes. So
yes.
Tell me about those.
Well, I'm a home-based cake business, so I'm food licensed, so I have my approval with the council, and I have a beautiful cake studio that's built in my gardens.
Fantastic. So people come along and learn how to make very fancy special occasion cakes.
Well, we start from the basics, so you can come along and I do a basic cupcake class, so you bake your cupcakes in the morning, and then we learn how to decorate them and cover them with fondant or sugar paste, and then we make beautiful little flowers, roses, leaves, and then once you've done that class, or you can start a beginner's 2 or 3 class, which is a basic celebration cake, one with a beautiful 3D bow or with exploding wires. And then once you've mastered those basic skills, the world's your oyster. I show you how to make handbag cakes, Noah's Arks, pirate ships.
Handbags and Noah's Arks?
All sorts,
Crikey, all out of cake?
All out of cake, totally edible.
All edible?
All edible.
Every single bit of it?
Every single bite of it, And I make cake pops as well, and I show students how to make macaron towers and all sorts, piping as well.
Oh, macaron towers, they're my favourite.
Indeed.
They're so pretty, aren't they?
And beautiful. And there's no calories because they're so small. So.
Yeah, well, there's no calories in cake, everybody knows that. Yeah, it's negative calories because it takes more calories to digest it than are actually in cake.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. It's a basic fact of life. So, I was mentioning that some of your cakes have actually been so good and some of your food's so good, it's actually featured in films.
Yeah, well, when I lived in the UK, I worked for a great company called Champagne and Caviar, and we were based in Sussex, and we would do lots of food and props for commercials. I'm known for Renee heartburn indigestion tablets, but I made a big crock and bush for that. And my husband's always said since the moment he met me, he's had heartburn, so, but that's through the calories and the good eating.
So you made a big crack-on bouche, that's the great big tower of choux pastry balls covered in caramel.
Absolutely.
And that was for a
Renee heartburn indigestion tablet, and for about 6 seconds you saw it in the background and then it outshot. But my biggest claim to fame was I made some food for Bridget Jones' Diary, The Edge of Reason, the second film. And I made 2 identical christening cakes, because all the cakes in film work is real cakes. It's not props, it's not fake.
Isn't it?
Yeah, so when we make real food, if it's hot, it has to be served hot, and we have to make sure it's all done properly, or if it's chilled, it has to be chilled. And so I did some food for that, and I did some food for Finding Neverland. And if you actually watch the DVD, in the deleted scenes, you see Johnny Depp lobbing all the vegetables and main course food at the children, because he was trying to break the atmosphere. And and
it was your food he threw?
It was my food.
Johnny Depp threw my cake.
He threw my sprouts and
Johnny Depp threw my sprouts.
Now, the only bad thing about doing all this, although it's not a bad thing, I never met the characters, because I actually didn't style all the food. Gina, who was the stylist, she would go and arrange it all and make it look beautiful. And so
you just made the food, but you didn't take it to the set.
No, but I was fortunate. We used to do BBC Children in Need, so Red Nose Day, we would do all the catering, and we'd meet Ainsley Harriott and Anthony Worrell Thompson, and we would also do the catering for Bargain Hunt and Antiques Roadshow, because they would come to Eastbourne and we'd do all the food for the dignitaries and we'd rub shoulders with them, and it was fantastic. It was a great catering job that I did.
So we'll talk about what got you into catering in just a moment, but I just want to tell you that you're welcome to come and join in this conversation if you want to. 13 13 32. We'd love to talk to you. If you've ever made a cake for a special occasion, or maybe you've done some cake making classes, we'd love to have a chat with you. Maybe you've made a wedding cake or a christening cake, or maybe you've got some questions about your Christmas baking, or maybe you've got a disaster to share with us. Whatever, we'd love to talk baking with you. 13 13 32. So now then, how did you get good at baking? So good that you were able to give classes?
Well, I started off, I'm big sis. My first brother was born when I was 7, and my next brother was born when I was 9, and both my brothers are 3 days, their birthdays are 3 days apart, and one of my brothers is born on my dad's birthday. So I had 3 test guinea pigs to cook for in July. Right. And so my mum, she let me go out and experiment in the kitchen. She never let me put things in the oven. She'd always be there to take them in and out. But she would allow me to kind of just experiment, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I was allowed to do that. And so every July we used to have this huge cake. I'd scrub the roasting tray, line it with butter papers, because we didn't have baking paper in them days, or if we did, my mum never told me about it. So I'd line them with all butter papers, and I'd make a rock-hard Madeira cake, bake it, and decorate it with frosting and lollies or sweets if you're in the UK. And they loved it. So I loved baking then. And I loved baking throughout my teenage years. I did a lot of cake fundraising at school and making. I was always on the cake stand. Yeah. But I loved it, and I loved making cakes and then just creating an interest. And because baking, although it was kind of there, not everyone did it, you know. But there wasn't electronic games like we have now. So, and then I decided to be a home economics teacher. But I met an amazing chap, Neil, who led me on to catering college, and he told me all about catering college. So I went onto a catering course, trained as a chef and pastry chef, and I discovered chocolate, which was my ultimate peak. And I realised, wow, what you can do with chocolate, and that led me into baking more. You know, making those Genoise sponges and whipped cream and Black Forest gâteaux, and I'm like, wow. So whenever I worked at my restaurants or hotels, whenever it was a birthday, they said, Jack, can you create a cake? And I would, you know, and I'd whip up a cake. And in the early 80s, about 1982, I sound very old, when I left college, sugar paste or fondant came about, because up until that point, it was all royal icing, marzipan, fruit cake and royal icing. But sugar paste sort of filtered through, and I realised, wow, it's quite an easy product to roll out, to decorate, tastes delicious, and you can get a lovely outcome, bright colours, lovely designs, you know. So it's like, wow.
Your imagination just can run wild.
And it does. If you look on my website and see my cakes that I've got to make, you'll go, wow, you've made that as a cake, you know. So
as well as doing the classes then, do you make cakes for special occasions?
I do.
People? You take orders?
Yeah, so I not only, my cake school has been running now for 4 years, and I've been teaching classes at other places as well, but I've always maintained novelty cakes, wedding cakes, and what I'm finding now is that I might have done a 21st birthday cake, say 4 years ago, and then the couple will get engaged, then they get married, and now I always joke, don't forget the christening cakes, you know, because I want to be their one-stop cake maker, you know, I want to continue, and it's lovely, and now I'm starting to meet them and go, oh, you've had your kids, you know.
You see their lives fold out, and you're part of it.
And I always joke, hopefully I'll still be able to see when it's their 21st birthdays, you know.
Oh, fantastic.
So I just love that progression, you know.
So when somebody comes to you, say, let's imagine it's a bride for a wedding cake, let's imagine. How do you start the process of talking about what their wedding cake is going to look like? Because you've got some beautiful cakes. I'm just going to describe one that's on the front page of your website, which looks like a beautiful blue boxes piled up, tied with white ribbon. It looks fantastic. Another one is several tiers of cake stand with beautiful, tiny little individual square cakes. Chocolate, some are blue, some are white. So attractive and pretty. So where do you start with the bride talking about the wedding cake?
Well, I've noticed brides have now changed in what they're wanting. A lot of brides now, especially the last couple of years, are very specific specific. They know what they want. We've got so much media like Pinterest and Facebook and all those. And a lot of the times I normally will finalise the designs once they've got everything else organised. So they've got their dress or their venue or their bridesmaid gowns. And then I normally say to them, right, let's pull all those ideas together and see what you want, rather than dictate a single design and then they've got to match everything in. So sometimes I'll say to them, have you got designs? And often they've got a massive mood board of all these different designs, and I can see where they want to become,
Right, where they're coming to.
But what I find is people will love designs, and they'll see another cake, which I've done, and one particular venue, I actually delivered the same style of cake 3 weeks in a row, but none of the brides knew I was making the same cake. But it was exactly the same style.
Because they saw
that design last year, and I didn't tell them when I was having the consultation. But actually, I'm going to that venue next week, week after.
Well, none of their guests would meet. It doesn't matter, does it?
No.
Some of the work that you have done is beautiful. I mean, there is a lot of very clean, simple lines, very elegant, all of these cakes. One of them is a very deep first tier, first layer of cake with a beautiful black bow and a diamante sort of clasp around it, and then a taller, narrower cake off the top of that, all done in, it appears to be black and white.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
Yeah.
What's inside there? Is it fruit cake? Is it sponge cake?
No, so that's called a double barrel cake, or sometimes it's actually 3 cakes that are actually stacked on top. And what most of the cakes nowadays are chocolate mud cakes, white chocolate mud. I do a beautiful orange and poppy seed cake. And it depends, because sometimes they want to use their cake as dessert instead of just cutting it up, bagging it up, and then giving it with the coffee and tea. And often a lot of venues now will actually allow you to serve your cake, and they'll pop some berries and coulis and dress it up. So in some ways that makes sense, because then you can actually incorporate the cake. And what I suggest for my brides is an alternate tier, so you can have different flavours, so that when they cut it up and serve it to the guests, that you could have white mud or orange and poppy seed, chocolate and caramel. There's about 10 different flavours that I do. So the cakes aren't always fruit cake, but I love fruit cake, and I always, when I do samples, I always say, would you like a piece? And they'll say, oh no, I don't like fruit cake. But I encourage them. I go, it's beautiful. You don't need a cup of tea to soak it. It's lovely and moist. Yeah. And I'm a real advocate for fruit cake, because I've always made fruit cake. So now, basically, probably 2 cakes out of 10 will have 1 tier as a fruit,
Wow. So how long does it take to make one of these big fancy wedding cakes?
Well, that's a question. It depends, because sometimes the cakes are always they're not always timelined, so you can't say, oh, that's going to take me 5 hours, because often you're always against the clock. You're always kind of thinking, wow, this is taking longer. So some cakes can take sort of over a 3-day period from start to finish, and often if they've got beautiful sugar flowers, which I make, I might start those months in advance, and then I'll box them all up so they're ready, So some cakes are quite time-consuming. A lot of the intricate piping you'll see, and some cake makers won't touch that, because piping is a really sort of fine, repetitious practice, And a lot of people aren't patient, but I love piping. I get in the zone.
Therapeutic.
Zen. Yeah, but I pump a bit of ABBA in the background, and off I'm piping,
I pipe to ABBA. Oh, here we go. Gimme a man after midnight.
Well, and often it is midnight when I'm piping, I can tell you. Yeah, often I burn that night oil, because often we're quite, for those that are cake makers out there, you'll realise we are night owls.
Well, we'll talk some more in just a moment, Jackie, because it's a fabulous story. It's great just talking cake. Who would have thought? Jackie Thompson is from Contemporary Cakes in Daisy Hill, and she's just published a book. We haven't even started talking about your book. We'll talk about that in a moment, and we'll talk some more about cake, and obviously some hints if people want to make their own cakes. We'll talk about that as well. And we'd love you to join in with the conversation. So if you've ever made your own celebration cake, we'd like to hear about it. How did you decorate it? What did you do? Was the first one a disaster? Did you have to have several goes at it? 13 13 32 is the number to call. We'd love a chat. Up after 10 this evening, but right now we're talking cake, and Jackie Thompson is with us from Contemporary Cakes in Daisy Hill. She's just published a book of cake projects for you to do, and she takes cake classes, and she's so good at making cake and food that her cake and her food has featured in movies. trophies. If you want to have a chat with her, if you've got a question for her, she's quite willing to talk to you. 13 13 32. And if you've ever made your own celebrity cake, we would love to hear about it. So let's talk, Jackie, about the book now and about some of the projects in the book. One of the cakes, and one of the cakes featured on the front cover of the book, is a handbag, and you've brought the handbag in tonight. It's purple and cream with tassels on, and you've perfectly recreated it in the form of a cake, and it's very intricate and complicated. How do you start making a cake in the shape of a handbag?
Well, we basically start the cake shape. So what I do is I bake a similar size tin, so I probably for that cake I actually chose a rectangle, and then I start about carving. So with cakes, it's not just about cake decorating, baking. We also have all these other skills, so I actually start to do a bit of sculpturing. So what I look at, I need to start shaping it, and I normally try to have something in front of me as a scale. Obviously I didn't have that handbag at the time, and so I just worked out what sort of size I wanted, and I wanted to have some realism, so I sort of I haven't done it to full scale, but I've done it quite close. And so we actually learned to carve the cake, and then what we do, we use a beautiful coating called ganache, which is chocolate and cream. It's delicious, and ganache sets firmer than buttercream, because buttercream can go quite soft, especially when we've got these hot temperatures here. So we use chocolate ganache, and so we carve the cake, and then we coat it with this delicious chocolate ganache, and that helps to keep the shape. It also firms and sets quite hard, so then when I roll out my sugar paste or the fondant, it just covers beautifully.
And what about the detail and the decoration? Because this is a very complicated handbag with sort of, I don't know what you would call them, they're not fleur-de-lis, but very similar, very intricate decoration. Yeah. How do you copy that and get the perfect colour?
Well, we have paste gel colours, so it's like a rainbow scale, and basically instead of it being paint form, it's paste gel colour. And what we do, we actually knead it into the sugar paste or the fondant that coats the cake, and then that's how we get our depth and colour. And on that design, I actually show in the book step by steps on how to use stencils. Now, stencils are a really amazing, simple tool. With using raw icing, we hold it against the cake, and then we just coat very gently a covering of raw icing, and then we carefully remove the stencil, and hey presto, we've got a beautiful design.
Now, some of these designs, I noticed you've got a cake in the shape of a Rubik's Cube. This handbag, I believe, is a designer handbag.
Yes.
Did you have to get permission to recreate the pictures and the cake?
Yes. And so first up, originally Lisa, whose 40th birthday cake, her husband phoned me up and said, Jackie, she loves Spencer and Rutherford, and he said, I'd like you to create any design. So I actually went on their website and actually looked.
That's the make of handbag.
Yes, and Spencer and Rutherford are in Melbourne, and I had to went on their website and I looked at the designs, and I really chose that bag because it's beautiful. It's got lots of elements that is lovely for cake decorating. It's got tassels and painting and silver. And so I made the cake, and they were very excited when they received it, and they couldn't believe how lifelike it was. And when I decided to write the book, I thought I must get permission from Spencer and Rutherford. So I actually phoned them up, and I then sent an email, and they actually was really overwhelmed that I was making it, and they said yes. And I said, about 6 months after getting, them to confirm that, I actually thought I'd love to feature this on the front cover,
It's a beautiful front cover as well.
Thank you.
So now, when you've got pictures of beautiful weddings with their wedding cakes that you've made, but there are projects in here for people who are not professional, but would like to get into it, to actually do themselves. Yeah. Is there a satisfaction in teaching?
There is, There is, because what's so lovely, often I'll have someone perhaps on the phone a little bit nervous, and I can hear it in their voice, and often I'll say, well, when you come into the class, come and sit to my right or my left. Yeah. And some of them are a bit anxious, because sometimes we don't always allow ourselves to be creative. We might have been creative at school, and then we do our sort of education, and then we get our jobs, and we have our families, and sometimes we're not always that creative. And it's quite amazing how, and I always let them choose their own colours, so they start to, and it's amazing, and they'll walk out, and you've only got to see the pictures that I put on the website or my Facebook page. You'll see them with their cakes, and they are just flabbergasted that they've created such a beautiful...
Who would not be happy at creating a cake?
Absolutely.
What about, to go back to the brides and the celebration cakes, have you ever made a cake and a bride or or the person, the client, has gone, no, that's not what I envisaged?
No, because when I do the quotes and stuff, when they come into the cake studio, they can see exactly, and they've really got a physical viewing of a display cake. Because I have about 15, 20 cakes displayed.
These are fake cakes?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Although some are real, because some of them are styrofoam, but I've got a pirate ship and a Noah's Ark, and that's real cake, and eventually, after about a year, it will decompose, you know? So
the
watch
decomposing
out.
Pirate cake, I'd still eat it, wouldn't worry me.
It's like a sinking ship, you know? I've replaced it twice now. But I've never, ever had that. The funniest story that I have was probably when I first moved to Australia, and the lady rang up and she asked me to make a cake in the shape of Australia. And I said, not a problem. And her beautiful daughter and son-in-law had been married overseas, and they were coming back to celebrate. So she wanted it in the map of the shape of Australia, and she wanted a simple inscription, piped inscription, and a little simple frangipani spray. So that was fine. I did it. I Googled Australia, and I looked at the shape, and that was fantastic. The day before she came to pick up, she rang us up, and she said, I just want to make sure you've included Hobart. And I went, of course. Of course, yes, of course I have. And I said, and what time are you coming over tomorrow? She said, about 2. I said, fantastic. I put the phone down and I Googled Hobart, because Hobart to me is an industrial dishwasher company that's in England, and they do dishwashers, ovens and all sorts. I thought, what is Hobart? Who is Hobart? So I Googled it, and Holy Moses is a beautiful little island below. So I quickly baked a muffin, and I shaped it in the shape of, because it's like almost like a heart shape almost, you know. And Holy Moses, I popped it back on that board, and she'll never know. She might if she reads the book, because I wrote about it, and she might if she's hearing it now. So sorry. But
just want to check you put Hobart. Oops. Oops. Oopsie. And so, of all the cakes that you have baked, Jackie, which is your favourite? Which is the one that you go, oh, yeah? Well,
I made a beautiful one recently, and it went to the Brisbane Club, and the couple that I met with were a lovely couple, in so much that it was a really intricate design, but they had huge confidence in me, because sometimes I have people that come along and they're just, are you sure we can do that? And it's like, well, yes, you know, and it was a beautiful cake, and it was 6 tiers, it had beautiful flowers, it was quilted, and it was lovely. And I often look at these cakes thinking, would I make that for my son's wedding? I mean, he's too young at the moment. But it was beautiful.
Jackie, thank you so much for coming along and talking to us. Jackie Thompson is from Contemporary Cakes in Daisy Hill, and her book is out now. Who would have thought there was so much chat in a cake? It's lucky I love cake, but I do. And I love talking to you, Jackie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.